Farmer here, registered physiotherapist. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the relationship between rotator cuff weakness and pain in the shoulder with throwing activities. And specifically, I want to talk to you about the one of the rotator cuff muscles referred to as your supraspinatus muscle. And essentially, this muscle, it's responsible for stabilizing, right, the head of your humerus in the shoulder blade region. And it's one of the main muscles for shoulder abduction, it's referred to. And shoulder abduction is essentially this movement here. And so what I find a lot of with these athletes who have been doing specific overhead sports or activities over a prolonged period of time, and then they come in and they're getting pain, right, with throwing. What I find happens with these particular individuals is that muscle in particular, that supraspinatus muscle, has become weak and painful. And also in a lot of cases, the rotator cuff tendon, and tendons connect muscle to bone, will become inflamed and become quite painful. And what ends up happening with these individuals is I'll find that they'll take a few days off of sports and the shoulder will start feeling better. And then again, as soon as they return to their throwing activity, so for example, let's say there's an individual who plays baseball who's a pitcher and is throwing, as soon as they get back to that activity, it'll be painful again. And what I'll find, as I mentioned, is that particular muscle, that supraspinatus muscle that's responsible for this movement here, will get really, really weak as a result of this kind of vicious cycle of the tendon becoming inflamed and then again overuse of that particular muscle. And so what I'll find from more of a biomechanical perspective is when I watch them go through their throwing action, particularly if you do this over a period of time, the arm angle and position will start to go down. So what I mean by that is, ideally, in a lot of cases with throwing, we want to make sure that the elbow is essentially higher than the shoulder. And the reason for that is biomechanically, if it starts to dip and go down, it puts a lot more stress and strain on the shoulder. And what ends up happening in a lot of cases with throwing is the arm will drag, it's called. And again, as I mentioned, this will put a significant amount of stress on the shoulder and can also put the individual in what's referred to as an impingement position, where again, that tendon can become irritated, rubbed on, and then you form this sort of tendonitis. So this is where that supraspinatus strength is so important in order to maintain that throwing position up here in a strong position. The other thing too, in terms of that supraspinatus muscle, it's actually the main muscle that helps in terms of rotation as well in this position. So again, really, really important muscle to rehab and get stronger with. This is also really true if, for example, I've seen lots of players where perhaps they've started to feel some pain, but it's near the end of their season. So let's say baseball again, for example, where they've got a few more games going. They get through the season, and then what will end up happening is they won't feel any pain on the off season. They're not doing any throwing. Again, they're not getting any real pain with just overhead movements or with reaching. But then as soon as they get back to that throwing motion again, all of a sudden, because that weakness is there, that endurance isn't there, what ends up happening is that from a biomechanical perspective, that dip starts to happen again when they're throwing, and all of a sudden they're right back to that vicious cycle that happened prior to their season ending. And so again, really, really important in terms of from a rehab standpoint with this, to make the rehab functional with regards to that throwing motion. So in a lot of cases, I'll have players go through their actual throwing motion with the band. We might do some videotaping to make sure that, again, biomechanically the shoulder is staying, or that elbow is staying above the shoulder line with the throwing. And also just making sure that, again, getting strong in terms of up in this position with internal and external rotation, again, with the throwing. Finally, reintroducing the throwing and perhaps again videotaping that to make sure that after multiple throws, again this is where the endurance takes place, that position is staying consistent. So thanks again for watching, and again, make sure that all of these exercises are appropriate for you, and that you certainly speak with a physiotherapist or a doctor to make sure this is an appropriate exercise. Thanks again for watching. Have a great day.